Well, it's a great conversation that took place. Really happy to hear where that went at the end in particular, as it focuses on the workforce of the future. You know, one of the things that I think we lose sight of is that the maritime economy is expected to double in the next 10 to 20 years. That's going to mean a lot more jobs. That's going to mean a lot more opportunity. And that's going to mean that we're going to need a very skilled and technical workforce if we want to compete globally on that stage. And so, you know, this is an area where I think that we can continue as a community to go ahead and build out. So we're getting the next panel mic'd up. It's the third and final panel that's focused on discussing the white papers. This one is going to feature the authors who wrote or co-wrote the white papers on alliances and a community of practice in ocean exploration. And as a reminder, the purpose of these sessions are to tee up and get you thinking about the following breakout session that will take place on the same topic, alliances and a community of practice. Mr. David Millar will be moderating this session. David serves as Fugro's key account manager for the US government, other national governments within the Americas region, the United Nations, the World Bank, and other multilateral development banks. He's responsible for overseeing the development and execution of Fugro's partnerships with public sector clients and overseeing Fugro's collaborative science activities within the Americas region. He also leads Fugro's global support of and participation in Seabed 2030 and the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. He's a member of the JEBCO Guiding Committee, former board member of the Maritime Alliance, and a current member of the Ocean Exploration Advisory Board that advises the NOAA administrator on ocean exploration issues. David?
Can you hear me? Good. Okay, so thank you, Alan. And it's a great pleasure to be with you this afternoon for this session on alliances and a community of practice. In this session, we'll be discussing the concept of organizations working together in an ongoing manner, and the emphasis is an ongoing manner, to achieve the common goals that benefit the overall ocean exploration enterprise. We'll be looking at alliances and a community of practice from two different perspectives. The first is data to address societal needs, and the second, public engagement and impact. We're very privileged to have two co-author pairs joining us today, and they'll be addressing the white papers that they respectively created. Firstly, Dr. Vicki Ferrini and Colleen Peters addressing the Ocean Exploration in a Data-Rich World white paper. And then Hōkū Pihana and Allison Fundis addressing re-envisioning the collective voyage of ocean exploration. They'll do self-introductions here shortly. But in terms of setting the scene, I think yesterday's panel discussion on data to address societal needs really set up this session very well. In that discussion, you'll remember hearing that data can be a wonderful way to connect communities. You'll remember hearing that we will need to involve diverse and local communities in asking, what does the ocean need versus what do we need? And you'll also remember hearing that we need to move from thinking about data sharing and access and the inclusion of Indigenous people, coastal and local communities as an afterthought, to a very deliberate, thoughtful, proactive, and ongoing engagement that is meaningful and impactful. It's been an absolute pleasure to work with these folks over the last few weeks, putting together this presentation and session for you today. And I got to see their passion, their creative energies come together on this important subject. There were so many common themes, challenges, and opportunities between the two white papers that we've decided to blend these into a truly integrated presentation. And you'll soon see the result of that. But first, I'd like to have the co-authors and presenters introduce themselves, starting with Vicki, working this way, and then we'll move right into the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, David. So you all know I'm Vicki Ferrini. I'm at Lamont-Doherty Earth Observatory. where I do lots of work with ocean data, and I've also recently taken on the role of Associate Director for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. So it's a real honor and privilege to be able to work together with my colleagues here to really identify synergies between these different realms of work that I'm personally engaged in as well. So.
Hey everybody, I'm Allison Fundis. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the Ocean Exploration Trust. We own and operate EV Nautilus that run the Nautilus Exploration Program, largely in coordination and collaboration with NOAA's Office of Ocean Exploration and the National Marine Sanctuaries. So our ship is right now in the Central Pacific. So we're thinking a lot and actioning on a lot of what we're talking about today, certainly in building those partnerships to make sure that we're doing exploration in an ethical way that engages in local impact.
Aloha mai kākou o Hōkūokahalelani Pihana wau. Aia ko o onihanau I wahiwa o ahu akai no ko noho ana noho wau I Long Beach, California. Akai ke ia manawa noho wau me ka umau ke iki kāne I puna Hawaii ma ka moko ke ave. He wahine, he makua wahine au, he wahine Hawaii au, he wahine Waʻa. Mahalo nui no ke ia wame ia o kou. So aloha mai, I'm Hōkū Pihana. I was born in Wahiawa, Oahu, raised in Long Beach, California, and now reside in Puna on the Big Island with my children. I am a mother, I am a Native Hawaiian woman, and I am a Waʻa wahine, a canoe lady. And so mahalo nui for sharing this space with us today, and it's really nice to be here. Mahalo for having us.
Hi, I'm Colleen Peters, and I'm the bathymetry data manager at Saildrone. And over the course of my career, I've had a very unique opportunity to commission 4 very different research vessels. So to bring all of the science equipment on board, configure, get everything working well together, logging, managing all of the data, and then of course, handing it to the chief scientists at the end of the mission. So I bring this very unique experience now to Saildrone, where I do very much the same thing. I configure all of the bathymetry platforms that we have, and between voyagers and surveyors, that could be 10s or maybe 20s of platforms over the years, which I may or may not come to regret. That's to be determined.
Great. So we have our team introduced now. So let's jump right into the presentation, which you're going to start.
Yeah. So with that introduction, I think that you will not be very surprised that I approach these several topics here with a very technical perspective. And when I think of data, of course, that's ones and zeros, files that need to be managed in a variety of different formats. But I think something we can all agree on is that no matter what your flavor of data might be, mapping data, sensor data, video data, I mean, that really is why we all leave the dock. You know, we are going out there with the purpose of collecting data to then make some more important information and products out of it to further our understanding. But of course, it really is important and very critical to know how that data was collected, which so many of you have authored dozens of scientific papers. You are all well aware that that's a very critical reason why that's included in any credible scientific publication, you know, how that data was collected, what methods you used really not only show, you know, that a proper practice was used, but also that that data can be therefore related to other data from other similar platforms. So we've talked a lot over the last few days about making data publicly accessible, but I wonder if we're focusing on the wrong thing, because to me, if I hand some multi-beam files to John Q. Public, they're gonna look at me and be very confused. You know, maybe we need to turn more focus and effort to information products. So translating those ones and zeros into something more meaningful, like a map. If I hand somebody a map and that I can explain to them, this is what we mapped, this is why we mapped it, this is why it matters to you, I feel like maybe that might go a lot further with a lot more people. But joining all of those important topics then gives us the knowledge. And so while you step off the ship or vehicle, as it were, with a hard drive full of data, that's your first real product or result of that effort. But then down the line, after that processing comes the knowledge, the understanding and the awareness of new information, new answers to your questions, and hopefully some sort of forthcoming action. So that's my very technical perspective of the situation. And now we're going to have Hōkū introduce a very different perspective.
Oh, mahalo nui, Colleen. So yeah, I think when we talk about data, we're always, our conversation focuses mostly on the qualitative numerical data that we can gather from the spaces that we engage with. But I think another important piece of data that I think happens within the conversations and relationships established are also valuable to document and contribute and include in all of this raw data that we collect and engage in, qualitative and quantitative. So that was kind of where our papers aligned, was we know that we've got to collect all of these data, but it's how we collect and what we collect and what that information tells us and how we interpret that. So for us, I think we were focusing a lot on looking at how data is collected in a meaningful way, that it feeds our communities, the spaces that we're engaged in, and it's a collective interaction that continues over time. So we're not just gathering data within a space and leaving that space or that community. We're establishing long-term relationships with those people that are connected to those places over generations of time, and including them in the conversation of how we care for and understand this place, and then including that knowledge and information and interpretation into something like Colleen was giving an example of a map as a product of a qualitative data collection and looking at all the raw numbers. But on a quantitative side, with things that we do when we gather information, collect data, we could produce such things as new mo'olelo, more stories, more oli, more chants, more olelo no'eau based on our observations. So Hawaiian proverbs, so that's not only perpetuating the practices of our kupuna, but it's also really enriching and providing more context to the numerical data that we're gathering as well. So it makes it more momona. Momona is like fat and rich and juicy. So it's like having all of that together helps us to understand the environment and the place and the peoples that we're engaging with and wanting to talk about and share about. So it's adding that extra layer that I think is valuable and gives more oomph to the qualitative side of everything, right? Like you're saying, the production of that map, it makes it more valuable to that person who's reading that map, because Colleen has provided not only her knowledge and her information, but also the ano and her passion for creating that map for that person. So it's layers of connectivity that data can provide for us that we really don't even realize it's doing at the time until we have a product. But yeah, thanks.
So when we first started getting together just to talk about this panel, we quickly jumped into the common themes that were really apparent in both of those papers. And we really synergized on just a few different themes that are illustrated in this graphic. So those were really communication and coordination, opportunity and funding, sharing, trust, and respect. And then once you have the foundation of those put together, then you can talk about equity and access and providing opportunities for people to engage through that foundation. So I'll let you talk about the data side, and I'll jump back in with.
So on the previous slide too, that intersection of data, information, methodology kind of also touches on this whole continuum of the handoff of how we handle data and evolve it and how we interact with each other. And it's really that intersection that I think is what's most fundamentally in common here. And if we look at this Venn diagram, equity and access, right? Making sure that we communicate and coordinate with each other more broadly than we do now. There's some levels of coordination in the data space and in the engagement space, but there's still a lot of silos, and we need to really bring that together. Sharing trust and respect is just so, we've heard it in several different sessions. It's really critical. And I think another really important thing here in both of these arenas is value, right? We have to shift our perspective on the value of this kind of work. It's one of the reasons it comes toward the end of many processes and is underfunded is it's not really valued in the same way that we value a lot of our other work. And so bringing all this together, finding opportunities, making opportunities known, both with respect to training and accessing and using data, and funding opportunities. If we bring all these pieces together, we can create a more equitable and accessible ocean, I think, ocean exploration community, and also ocean enterprise in general.
Yeah, so just to talk a little bit more about those and just kind of some of the examples that we've provided in the paper. So the trust and respect. So really just like when we're setting out to conduct an expedition, you know, we're talking about building alliances first, so start with partnerships, right? Any relationship like that has to start with trust. You have to build that trust, and that of course takes time. Any relationship takes time to build. So one of the examples that we highlighted in the paper is the work of Ocean Exploration Trust working in Pihana Marine National Monument in 2021. So a little less than a year prior to our expeditions were starting, we started consulting with the Pihana Marine National Monument team, and they connected us with representatives from the Native Hawaiian Cultural Working Group, which are representatives from the co-trustees of the monument and all fractions of Hawaii representation. And through that consultation process, we began to see opportunities for collaboration. And so it's just kind of building on itself. And then from there, we started teasing out opportunities. And those opportunities turned into a lot of dialogue about what are the needs for the local community? How can we make these expeditions meaningful in Hawaii? And so a lot of our conversation first started with some of the education and outreach activities that we can do. And we want to start small. We can't come in and rush in and try to do everything all at once. And so it was a lot of conversation talking about what the needs were. And one of the major needs is more science education, especially for some of the younger ages and youth, and especially in some of the Hawaiian immersion schools where they're doing language revitalization efforts. And so we really concentrated on some naming, which Hōkū will talk about in a little bit, but also conducting some of our, we do all of our expeditions live, so we stream everything live. So making sure that those students were equipped with the vocabulary in Olelo Hawaii, native and Hawaiian language. We were doing connections directly to classrooms in Olelo Hawaii. So making sure that they've also got representatives on board that can be their role models. So these are people from their communities serving in paid internships and paid positions that are connecting back to their schools. So it's just some of the opportunities that came out of our collaboration.
I think I'm kicking this one off, right? So we picked a few example challenges and opportunities. Again, there's a fair amount of overlap and similarity that we saw here. So I'm gonna probably give a data-centric sort of example, but varying levels of input and effort, I think in the planning stages, but also in many stages. And when I think about this in terms of data, and we heard earlier some mention about standardization, and for example, that should in theory be an easy thing to achieve, but the reality is that different groups have different levels of effort and resources available and processes are in place. So maybe instead of having a standard data structure, for example, that everyone aspires to, we instead work toward a standard way of documenting the data because that's a lighter lift, trying to meet people where they're at and try to gain some efficiencies by learning from what's being done in other groups. You know, we, as scientists, we document our work in papers and build upon the science and discoveries of others, but we don't necessarily share in the same kind of way the progress and the successes and the failures that we make in the data space and in the engagement and diversity space. And we really need to build that so that we can learn from others and gain efficiencies and compensate for those varying levels.
So when we think of stakeholders working for a commercial company, of course, I think about my customer or the group that's funding the mission. Those are certainly the number one people that I want to keep happy. Well, those are my boss, but you know, we need to think a little bit beyond that, because sometimes I think what happens is we think in that very short term, who's going to be upset if we don't do X? But we need to think about it a little bit more broadly, where that might include the people that are collecting that data, the scientists who will use that data, the archives who will receive that data, and then maybe whoever could be processing that data. It may not be the same as the scientists or the archives or whoever. So eventually reaching the public, thinking through all of the stages that that data passes through until we reach that end goal. And it really is not something that you can do as one person. It takes a team to really consider all of these aspects of meeting those needs. In terms of existing expertise, you know, we talk about how do we make it easier or better or standardized to collect data, report data, manage data, all that kind of stuff. When I look around the room, I don't see a ton of people that are actively responsible for acquiring data. I see a lot more users of data, or people who receive the data or make the products out of the data. So one way to think about it is to look within your own organizations and see who's missing from that conversation, because those are the people you want to have the buy-in from. Those are the people who are going to actually take that action that we may decide or recommend here. Those are the people that are going to implement that, and you want to have their support in doing that to make it actually effective. So looking both within the organization, but also with your partners in any given mission. And, you know, one group might be really good at this, one group might be really good at that. You know, let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's utilize each other's expertise as best we can to really contribute, but to also make an efficient use of effort and funding.
It's me.
No.
Oh, we're going to press. Okay, sorry.
You're up.
So the next one, project level planning. I'm reading the other way. So project level planning and engagement. We talked a lot about you know, just kind of the timelines that are needed for this. A lot of conversation about the fact that data and you know, the incorporation of the cultural aspects and weaving together Western science with local and indigenous knowledge, that has to happen at the forefront of everything. And for that to happen, that has to be factored into the funding and the planning process as well. So it's definitely one of the challenges right now, especially for those of us that might be on some of the annual funding cycles, to really make sure that we've got continuity and consistency in some of those relationships, and making sure that the partnerships and the work, especially the work that's on the shoulders of those in the local communities, are really supported financially, so they can undertake the work in that and contribute to the partnerships.
Mahalo. Yeah, and I think, so the final bullet point that we have there is that community model, establishing relationship with people from the place. I would like to say from and the place, so establishing that relationship with both people and place. And I think just when I was just looking at the other three bullets, I feel like that's a culmination of this relationship with the community. In order for us to really set a tone and be collaborative, we have to understand and really make the time to establish a meaningful relationship with the people that we're engaging with. So I think for us as Indigenous peoples, we've experienced a lot of ancestral pain with different ways that people have engaged within our space, or have come and utilized our resources, or extracted the knowledge that we have within our communities. And so in order for us to shift from ancestral pain to ancestral healing, we need to develop collaborations like this from the forefront and really make them meaningful. So some of the questions that I wanted to ask yesterday to the panel speakers were, what is your relationship to the ocean? How does that guide your stewardship? And how does that lead your intent? What is your intent? And I think the intent is the hugest one, because for us as people who live in these spaces and connect with our culture and connect with our practices, that's automatic. We know what that relationship is and what the intention of that reciprocity is. But when people come into our space and learn about it, and we have this common interest in love, but what is our intent? So establishing a really meaningful and trustworthy relationship at the forefront with the people that are from that space is vital, because then that leads us into an ancestral healing practice, as opposed to really focusing and continuing to focus on the pain of what happened. And if you take a look at the white paper, if you notice, there are olelo no'eau that open up each section. So there's Hawaiian proverbs, and each of one of those proverbs were created based on either observations made by our ancestors, our kupuna, relationships had amongst communities, experiences and relationships had within our environments. And so to really embrace and activate those observations and those olelo no'eau, I think it's important that we reflect that in our behaviors and how we engage with each other. And I think the first and foremost is establishing that trust, or reestablishing the trust within each other, so that we can, as Indigenous peoples, move into a space of ancestral healing and strengthening, and provide all of us with that knowledge and interest. We all have a common love, right? You know, I hear a lot throughout the forum is that there's more things that connect us than divide us. And I feel like we as a Lahui, as a community, really want to focus on those things as opposed to the things that have divided us. And the beauty of Waʻa, that was the one thing that I think with our olelo no'eau, they really focused on the identity of the canoe. And the canoe is a very big metaphor in how we engage and relate to each other. And I think if we put ourselves in that space and know that each person has a function in the Waʻa, each person contributes to the movement of that Waʻa, each person contributes to the voyage within the Waʻa. So seeing all of those things and capturing it and really reflecting it in our relationships and our behaviors with each other, I think is pivotal in how we're going to move forward in caring for our oceans. Community tomorrow. Am I up again?
I think so.
Oh, is this the, oh, hey, we're facilitating effective communication and coordination. Again, metaphor of Waʻa. I think, I mean, I am a canoe woman. I believe like that it just, the canoe heals everybody. But it's really, you know, metaphorically, physically, and, you know, image, it's just, if we have that relationship that's effective, productive, and really genuine, meaningfully genuine, you know, I think that'll change a lot of how we relate and engage with each other in the future.
So I know that this has been mentioned by somebody previously, but it's important to understand what you do know and also what you don't know. And so something that I just sort of do somewhat naturally is connect people with others that have, you know, someone who has a need and someone who has the expertise. Because I really, truly believe that it is not very efficient to reinvent the wheel if it's not necessary. We have tons of other challenges and objectives to try to achieve. And I personally don't want to waste resources on problems that have already been solved. So I think it's really important to have spaces like this where we can get together, share what we know, share what we don't know, so we can try to make better use of all of our efforts, particularly as we work together on lots of missions. I think that the ocean exploration community does quite a lot of good work in terms of utilizing partnerships in a variety of different ways, collecting data, providing data, hosting various people on the ships or engaging with the missions, either in person or remotely. Also outreach and education, plans that come out of the types of science that are conducted and the lessons learned on the missions. But I think that this particular group can, I think one danger, I think, is becoming too cliquey. So, you know, it's of course very comfortable to work with your friends. You know, you sail with somebody, you know, for years, and you develop a rapport and you enjoy working with them, and you just want to keep doing that. And that's very comfortable. But you know, it's really time to be more cognizant of getting out of our comfort zone and inviting the people that have different opinions than you do to really open the thinking well outside the box.
So my piece of this vision for 2032 is really that we are a community that prioritizes, values, supports, and sustains both data and diversity. And I mean those two, the data and diversity in very broad senses. I mean diversity of opinion, diversity of people, diversity of career tracks. We have to really bring this whole new perspective on what we're doing and really work together as a community if we really want to try to confront the challenges that are ahead of us as the planet is changing.
Yeah, and the last point is very similar and dovetails nicely into Vicki's, and that's just really providing more opportunities that lead to a diverse workforce. So again, that diversity is the types of vocations that are feeding into the pipelines. So creating more pathways and more inroads and multiple inroads at all different levels. So we've got to have a lot of entry points for all of the different vocations, but also making sure that everybody is committed to providing just excellent opportunities that are meaningful for the student or the educator or the cultural representative that might be on board for you, making sure that that is a multi-directional relationship and not a unidirectional one. And then if we have all of those things together with a really strong alliance and a bigger community of practice, we really feel that we'll really be advancing the national and local community priorities for ethical exploration and ultimately delivering a lot more value to the American public and people.
Ua ea hiki ke kairipo lipo, lua ea hiki ka papakue, lua ea hiki ke kualono kai, lua ea hiki ke kumue. Mahalo nui. So this was an oli that was created from the relationship that we established during the naming process of naming the voyages for the expeditions going up to Papahana Mokuakea. So members of the Cultural Working Group collaborated with folks from Ocean Exploration Trust to develop names for their 4 voyages up into Papahana Mokuakea. So we all came together and had conversations and gathered data about the space, the relationships to Papahana Mokuakea, what Papahana Mokuakea is to us, how it feeds us as our community, and how we look to it as our kupuna, as our elder sibling. And so Lu'ua'ea Ehiki Ke is the practice of a noni. So it's part of a Hawaiian riddle. Yeah, and it depicts the action of moving up and down, flowing in and out. Yeah, so lu'ua'ea ehiki ke, so you're going down and then you're arriving up. And so each of the end of that, lu'ua'ea ehiki ke kailipo lipo, is the name of the first voyage of Papahana Mokuakea. And Lipo Lipo reflects the deepest depths of our oceans that our ROVs are going to go down to, yeah, and gather all of that information of that space for us, right? And then as we move back up into the oceans, we transition into the Papaku, Kapapaku, and that's our coral reef systems, our Papa, our foundation, right? And then as we continue to go up, we come into Ke Kualonokai. And so that is kind of that misty twilight zone of our ocean areas. Yeah, so as you see the imagery of the oli, it's taking us down into the depths and then bringing us back up. And the last voyage is Lu'ua'ea Ehiki Ke Kumue. And Kumu is a significant name of source, of teacher, of place. Yeah, so it's like a piko. So when we come back up to the source that we began and really, you know, dive down and come back up, it shows that imagery of our movement, our relationship, and our returning back to that pico of source. Yeah. So this was a reflection of how quantitative data can be collected and perpetuated and create a result that may not have a p-value, may not have a statistical result that we're looking for. We're not accepting a null or an alternative hypothesis, but what we're doing is we're collecting data that creates a result that perpetuates a practice of people's. Yeah. So Oli is not just housed in a museum or in the books of our kupuna. It's perpetuated through the conversations that we have with those amongst us, the relationships that we create with our keiki, and then those that we have with our ancestors. And it's just really a beautiful thing to be a part of it and reflect not only the value of quantitative data, but the value of qualitative. Did I do that right? I might have got it backwards, but you know what I mean? Like there's value in both of it. And I think it's really important to really embrace all of that. And this is just an example of what we can do within our own communities, whether it be Kanaka-Oiwi or, you know, Hispanic, Native American, German, Irish, Scottish, whatever it is, there is a hana, there's a practice, and you can perpetuate that in your relationship to your research and your work. So mahalo nui.
Well, it's very, very inspirational. And hopefully we'll shift gears now with this tee up. So we'll move from kind of the presentation phase now to questions from the floor. Hopefully this has stimulated some ideas and some questions. I can ask one maybe just to get you a moment to think about that question. I guess one would be maybe around, we've shared here the vision for a community of practice and maybe what that might look like in 2032. How do we get there, right? I mean, it's a big leap from where we are today and historically to where we hope and aspire to be. So just really quickly, your respective comments and thoughts on the step and process to get there. Maybe, do you want to start, Vicki?
Sure. So I think one way to start is by doing things like this, right? Like for just the example of the five of us coming together to prepare for this, I think we all learned quite a bit about ourselves and each other that we didn't necessarily expect. And as we have these conversations and discover these synergies that are really right in front of us that we weren't even really anticipating, we start to see the opportunities and the path. I've always been someone who's had the path sort of reveal itself in front of me, which is maybe crazy to rely on, but I think that, you know, this is a first step, having a vision of where we want to be and then kind of working backwards and recognizing that the model that we've been using is moving slowly, right? Like I say all the time, in my data world, over the course of my career, progress has been made, but it's very slow. And the same conversations are happening that were happening when I first was out of graduate school. We need to move faster, I think, on both of these topics. And in particular, diversity and inclusivity. The time is now. We can't wait 10, 15 years and still be having these same conversations. We have to shake it up. I don't have the answer, but I know we have to shake it up.
Thanks, Vicki. Allison?
Yeah, I completely agree with the shaking it up part. You know, I think that we definitely have to be really honest with ourselves, and we have to be really, we have to allow ourselves to say that we're not doing it right. And it's not going to be from point A to point B. And we really just have to look inward. We have to listen. Listening is one of the biggest parts of building trust. And as we're expanding conversations and bringing people that we haven't worked with, you know, and opening up our space and going into new spaces, we really have to first listen and actively listen.
Okay.
Yeah, gosh, I was digesting everything they were saying. I don't know, I always look in terms of Waʻa. And I think, you know, in the action of moving, you know, we need to move in a fast way, but also in a methodical, productive way to where everything that we're doing right now is something that we can produce in 2032. And I think just taking the action of initiating the conversations and coming to the table and really acknowledging where we all are, where we all stand and where we can meet each other at the common ground and how we can strengthen each other's skill sets. And really, like you're saying, being an active listener. Sometimes in conversations, we're meant to just stay quiet and ho'olohe, just listen, you know, and other times it's meant, somebody always told me there's a place to make a comment and there's a place to just be quiet and listen. And we kind of need to know that. I think internally our gut always tells us that, but then sometimes we're like, oh, I gotta say it. You know, and I think that's a human thing, you know, acknowledging we make mistakes, but we grow from the mistakes and so on. But it's really being actively listening in the conversation and contributing. Like, without the relationship that Allison guys had with Papahana Mauō on their expeditions and this interest and us coming together, these names wouldn't have we wouldn't have created these names if it was just us guys. Perhaps, you know, but I think it's more meaningful when all of us are in the conversation because it's reflective of that. So I think those are huge things, is in making it a kākou thing, you know, I say, you know, it's all of us. And in Waʻa too, I think one beautiful metaphor of the canoe is that all of us come to the canoe for a particular reason, right? We don't know anything about each other, but we come to paddle. But then as you get to learn, you come to find that you've got a psychologist, you have a teacher, you have a scientist, you have a baseball coach, you know what I mean? You have such a diverse and eclectic community within your canoe that you could take, I don't want to use advantage of, but you know, they can benefit your movement forward. So I think those are things to think about. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's really important to just decide that we're gonna make a change, but we also have to give ourselves a deadline because we can't just drag this on forever. Like, we need to perhaps bite this down in smaller chunks. So what are some more achievable goals on the 1 year, 2 year, 3 year level, 5 year, then 10 year? You know, because at most of these forums, we look at the 5 and the 10 year, but I think that's too long. I think we can't wait 5 years. We have to do something in a much smaller timeline if we're going to actually affect change. And finding out, you know, what the sort of common themes are among the various operators and institutes and everything, and working to try to hone in on some of those commonalities first, and then worry about the edge cases. We can't start on the edge. We got to start in the center.
Great. Great thoughts. Thank you. Do we have any questions now? Yeah. Go ahead, please.
Can you hear me? Okay. I think you asked my question. I think many of them answered my questions, but thank you so much. That was very beautiful. And I know we've had a conversation about the paper, and then I saw this, so it was a little emotional. So I didn't know what you were saying, but I could feel what you were saying. And so I was able to interpret that. So that's very powerful. So to what Colleen was saying too, is the fact that we see it works. And we've literally seen it before our eyes, that if we just ask and we just listen, that it works. It really does. And that's, for me, that's all I want. Because like you said, these are the same conversations. I'm gonna go to another meeting and it's gonna be the same thing. I'm like, I started as a graduate student in 2005, or in 2022, and it's the same thing. And I don't mean for the tears to come out, but I think it's the frustration. I've had this conversation with many of you. It's just like, we just get tired. Yeah. Just really, really tired. But thank you. And I think this is an example to all of us that it's not perfect. I'm sure that the road to where you got here, to where we saw this beautiful thing, that there were probably challenges and uncomfortablenesses and that were not shared, you know, right now, but it's okay. Yeah. Like, we see the end beautiful product that we can do. And I love science. I love it. But I also love my community, and we're seeing that right now. Armand and Maggie can tell you, we live in a community right now we're fighting because people are not connected to the land. People are coming into our space. They don't even live there, and they're destroying it. And how do we do that? Because we feel like the science is there, our voice is there, we're saying it, and it gets silenced. And in the end, like, we love Corpus. Like, I want my daughter to grow up there. We love the ocean. We love She loves it. She could spend hours there. She ate the sandwich. She was little, you know, she's okay. We say she didn't die, right? But I don't know. I don't know what to say other than we see it here. Sorry, if that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Wow. Are there any other questions? I can't see this. Yeah, okay.
One more question for you. Thank you. I walk here so I can see the panel members. Thank you so much for the stimulating discussion. I want to go back to the point one of the slides, you talk about equity and access. I understand many of these discussions related more domestic because we map our EEZs, a lot of regional alliances, our sponsor from federal, city and local government. But if you talk about the ocean, particularly the climate, is a global problem. There's a lot of coastline. Every coastline matters. Every bathymetry matters when you talk about ocean climate on the global perspective. On the data and the technical level, I know like Vicki connected with Sea by 2030, Argo is a global program. In terms of equity and access, I'm just curious to see the panel members' perspective. How do you think about the global equity and access?
Let's just start. So I can kick off a little bit of an answer to that. I think about this a lot, obviously, because of partly my role in Seabed 2030, but also in general, right? The ocean is one, there's no boundaries, everything's connected. I think that in my experience working in the international community, I'm very proud of the work that we do here in the US. And I think that we provide a good example for other nations. We also provide a lot of support, right? Our data center for bathymetry also serves as the international data center for bathymetry. We make that available as a resource to the world and everyone can access the data. So my hope is, and as I go through my daily work, my job, my intention is if we can get our processes and models of working together sorted out in our domestic community, maybe we can then share our successes and again, our failures with others around the world in the hopes of us helping them, those who are interested in pursuing similar things, right? Like I don't want to assume that everyone wants to do what we're trying to do, but at least make that available to others so that they can learn from and leverage and build upon what we build together here.
Speak to the outreach side of it a little bit, you know, and if we look at just the population of the United States, it is a cross section of the world, right? So if we are reaching, in terms of outreach, if we are reaching the American public, we can reach pretty much anybody in the world. So, you know, we can do that through translating materials. You know, we're doing that into, for example, at Ocean Exploration Trust, we translate all of our educational and highlight videos in Spanish. We make sure that we've got closed captioning and accessible, that our website is accessible for hearing and visually impaired. So just trying to do more to open up access, but you know, I don't think it's America versus international approach. You know, I think it's one approach in many ways.
Yeah, and I think I can speak on just the indigenous or Kanaka side, but like when we're talking about equity and inclusion is, and I think we've all kind of commented on it, is really establishing that relationship at the beginning with those indigenous and local communities that are closely tied to those spaces. Because often I think we come in as scientists wanting on a mission to gather information, and we take from that space and we don't give back and we don't support that community. So I think from that, like involving and really understanding, kind of involving us at the beginning of the conversation is one key thing, but then also too for us, it's understanding when it is time, when and where, you know, like, so when we have these conversations, knowing that now we're going into spaces that, you know, during the times of our kupuna, we never would go to. Those are realms that we knew were there, but weren't the realms for us to be in. But now that we're going into these spaces and it's happening, involving us in the conversation to gather context and understanding and connectivity is imperative. Like I looked at a map and I think it was the mapping where the places where the seafloor has already been mapped and the red areas where the seafloor wasn't mapped. And if you notice that was all around island communities, right? And so there's relationships island peoples have with those spaces that are intimate, sensitive, you know, very closely tied. So for us going into those spaces and capturing imagery and taking it, that's something that, you know, different than, you know, for other people going in. So establishing those relationships, understanding those cultural practices and norms is imperative. And like you said, just being part of it. Like we were talking about it, sometimes just coming in and doing the work, putting your hands in the dirt, planting a tree, just hamaoleo, hana lima, you know, just work with your hands and shut your mouth. And you know what I mean? Like I say that nicely, but with the intent to just learn, you know, and not teach. You know, I think all of us, and we were talking about as leaders and educators, we always are feeling the need to tell. And we forget to just be quiet and listen and learn. So I think that's a huge, significant part of enabling us to reach this global audience and map an entire world that we want to tell a story about. I think that's imperative. And also too, with like the Olalo Hawaii, and the lessons. And one thing that's so awesome with these guys is that for us with Hawaiian language, it isn't a translation of English. Hawaiian is its own language, and there aren't words that exist, ikaolala Hawaii, that we have in English, like calibration, you know, that's a hana, that's an action. So with our work in I want to use the word translating the curricula, we're putting it in a context that's from an Ike Hawaii perspective, right? A Native Hawaiian worldview. It's not compromising our standards of education and putting it into this English context of what we understand. It's really shifting it and kanakafying the English, if I can say that, right? You know, making it, yeah. So that I think is an important thing too, is not translation, but recognizing Olala Hawaii as its own language.
I would definitely say that I'm aware of the global scale of things, but that I definitely have a little bit more of a focus on the domestic. And that's really in the context of trying to get our own house in order before sort of growing outwards to that international arena. So, you know, I do think that we need to keep that in mind and keep that sort of on task, but I think we have a lot of work to do within the U.S. Community, a lot of the folks we have here today, before we can work outwards.
Well, thank you all very much. We've exceeded our time, so thank you for indulging us for these extra few minutes. Please give a round of applause to our panelists for their contributions here today. And I think Ellen, yeah, all right.
Free to stay there. We'll be out of here in just a second. So thank you to the panelists. I will say that personally very touched by the comments, particularly at the end of the day. And as we go into our breakouts this afternoon, it goes back to an opening panel conversation, right? A comment about the ocean being our ally and us being an ally for the ocean, but also being an ally for each other. And so this is how we're going to get through this. This is how we're going to advance. We're going to do it together. It's through relationship, it's through dialogue, and it's through active listening and active learning from each other. So as we go into our breakout after this 30-minute break, I encourage you to take that with you and take these great words with you as well.